Finally, after a gap of 19 years, we are now tantalizingly close to local government elections. This past Wednesday, the National Assembly unanimously approved 4 bills, one setting up a local government commission, another called the Fiscal Transfer Bill, a third, the Municipal and District Councils Bill, amendment, and a local government bill. These are all intended to strengthen the system of local government and indeed bring democracy closer to our communities. Now, of course, we are not yet there, and maybe we should not get overexcited. Cynics will fear delays in presidential assent to these bills. For me, I think those fears are unjustified, notwithstanding the delays we've had in matters of presidential assent before. Indeed, I am confident that President Ramatar will move quickly to give his assent to the 4 bills, and so that we can move to the next stage of implementation. It is, of course, true that the bills took a long time to be passed by the National Assembly. But let us accept the gift as it is for democracy in our communities. Soon, we will be able to participate as candidates within our own communities, within our city councils, and these other forms of democracy. The government, the political parties need to start promoting these bills, to advertise them, to educate people what they are all about. After all, some of them really do have far-reaching effect. The Fiscal Transfer Bill, for example, guarantees monies to local government bodies on what appears to be a fairly reasonable and equitable basis. So I'm calling, Plain Talk is calling, on the political parties, on the government, on the state broadcast agencies to promote these bills, explain to people what they mean and what they mean for the people. If we have that, if we can bring those, despite all the problems we've had over the past 19 months or so with gridlock in the National Assembly, the Parliament, this administration will have taken significant steps towards promoting democracy in Guyana. I'm Christopher Ram, welcoming you to Plain Talk. Welcome back to Plain Talk, and may I quickly introduce my guest, who is no stranger to Plain Talk, no stranger to Guyana. She's an assistant professor at the Vancouver campus of the University of British Columbia. Dr. Janette Bulkan, welcome to Plain Talk.
Thank you, Chris.
You've been here for a few weeks enjoying your summer break from university?
I have been. It's been a working holiday.
Working? What have you been doing?
I have been immersed in thinking about Amaila and its consequences for Guyana, and just reacquainting myself with the subjects that interest me most. Everything interests me, but particularly governance across various facets of Guyanese life, and particularly the way governance affects indigenous peoples and forest peoples, and of course the forestry industry as well. So I've been busy just thinking and reflecting on what I've seen and people I talk to.
Many people, after a break of several months, probably a year since you were last here, well, I think you were here for Christmas last year?
I was.
Yes. Find Guyana a restful place. that you could come and relax with family and friends and just allow time to pass by. Did you find that possible?
Very much so, yes, because my family is here. My mother and three of my brothers and one sister. So I have a large extended family as well. So Guyana is home, and I am very rested and happy to be back whenever I can.
You mentioned, interesting that you say Guyana is home. You've been living out of Guyana for several years. I guess you'd call yourself a member of the diaspora?
Only a recent member of the diaspora, because I've spent the majority of my life in Guyana. So in that sense,
you worked at the University of Guyana itself?
Yes, I worked at the University of Guyana. I was here through the 80s and 90s, and up until 2003 when I left. So I'm, not just a very recent overseas-based Guyanese.
What made you leave in 2003?
I went to Yale to do my PhD, and after that, couldn't find work in Guyana.
Is that ironic that you go there, you enhance your education, and then you can't get work in Guyana, in the forestry sector, where we're supposed to have our greatest resources and need the highest levels of management?
I think it's, yes, ironic, but not unique to me, because Guyana is really, I think, at base, anyone who dares to lift his or her head out of the sand is immediately a target for repression and reprisal. And so anyone in my position who is dependent on trying to get a job in your country would be immediately suspect, both to, in any job the government would have a say in, or even a private sector job or an international consultancy. One would immediately be targeted and not allowed to work. And I don't think I'm the only person in that situation. There are others.
What role do you see the Guyanese diaspora, and I think they're probably mainly located in North America and the Caribbean, what role do you see them playing in Guyana's social, political, and economic development?
Well, I think they play a multifaceted role. Certainly there's a role of remittances, which is, well, you would know more about this than I would, but it's, I think, a large contributor to economic life in Guyana. I think many overseas Guyanese are blogging on Stabrook News's website, and so, or on Demerara Waves, and so their immediate responses to news items are picked up and read as well, and they pick up and read other items which are produced here. So in that case, there is an unmediated conversation between local and overseas-based Guyanese, and so that I think that being able to participate in a really almost tactile way in events in Guyana is now afforded to us by social media in a way that wasn't possible before. So I think the immediacy of Guyana is not just for people who live here, but when I'm awake the last thing I do before going to bed at night is I read the news. I look at what's online, and it's the first thing I do in the morning before beginning my life in my working life, which is different. So, I've swallowed Guyana as well, and I live it, and I experience it, I think, of course, not in the same physical way as I would here, but in a real way, it's in my head, and I carry Guyana around every day in my heart.
What's your impression when you pick up the papers? You probably read some man killed his wife, some youngster killed his sweetheart. You read about political gridlock. You read about the private sector operating in their own peculiar ways. How does this affect you as a Guyanese, as a concerned Guyanese, maybe?
I think we are old enough, Chris, you and I, to be able to imagine that what the possibilities could have been for Guyana, and to be bereft, really, at the knowledge of what we've let ourselves become, or what we have been, the paths we've chosen as a people since independence. And when I pick up the papers, as you say, and I see these, the house is an abattoir for maybe hundreds of women, and the home invasions and the really degraded popular culture from Parliament to the streets of Guyana, I feel that this is a manifestation of the breakdown of governance at all levels. And I'm reminded that we, even though we share the same experiences of the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean, that the small islands, which we used to, when I was a child, they were seen as very junior to Guyana, this jewel in the British Empire, that they have moved far in advance of us in terms of their reconciliation to global processes in governance, and we have not. We've remained that plantation. And in that plantation, power is concentrated power is concentrated at the top and spread across all aspects of social and economic life, so that everyone either self-disciplines and knows his or her place in the structure, or is made to feel the whip and then is then disciplined back into his or hers allotted role. And so the frustration for people who are in that plantation, I think, is manifest from time to time. They have to erupt and get rid of the poison. And we see that. I mean, I think men who kill their wives, as unimaginable as that is, must be themselves suffering from immense social anomie and immense frustrations, lack of jobs, lack of any sense of belonging to a structure or to belonging to any social entity that can validate them as persons. And I think it's the lack of validation as persons that affects us all, whatever our place in the social strata of Guyana.
Do you put this down to the fact that all our political parties have abandoned any concept of working class and socialism and really talking about the people, and all we talk about mega projects and how much money we make here and make there? Is it that we've abandoned fundamental human values and principles?
I'm not sure. I think, well, first of all, I would say that beginning in November 2011, there was, the curtain lifted a little bit. And so I think we're beginning to see real significant differences post-November 2011 and the one-seat majority in Parliament than we saw before. And that is of immense, I think, consolation to anyone who's Guyanese or who feels affection and love for what Guyana is and can be. Because even when I looked at the footage of the disparate groups protesting in front of Parliament on Wednesday, and you think, well, is that going to lead anywhere? Is that the right thing for people to, are those parliamentarians even aware of these various groups that are protesting? I think at least they're doing that. People are standing up to be counted in front of Parliament. Maybe they would not have bothered before. Certainly, I don't think once we saw before November 2011 the same spontaneous, self-directed, self-organized appearance and manifestation of public life, of civic protests in front of Parliament than we saw before. So when you ask me about whether our politicians have abandoned ideals of governance, I would say before 2011, November 2011, it was an exercise in futility because the lack of local government elections and lack of any real impact or real role in the public space, in public life, would have been a huge constraint to the opposition political parties, because that space is dominated by really just the executive in Guyana, the apex of power. And after that, I think certainly we've seen a little bit of quite a lot of opening compared to what went before. And the issue of governance and whether we've abdicated as individuals our possibilities of making a difference, I think are maybe so, yes. There's been some abdication, but I know at the same time as you know that with this immense migration out of Guyana, including persons like myself, that we've gutted our society, we've hollowed out our society. And so what passes for communal life and what passes for civic responsibility can only be a shadow of its former self.
How optimistic are you? You heard my opening commentary. How optimistic are you about a passage of these 4 bills that ought to be bringing us pretty close to local government elections?
I am optimistic because what I read was that the parliamentary parties unanimously passed those bills. So I think because we've spoken about shared governance for such a long time in Guyana, given our ethnic divide and these entrenched positions of intransigence on all sides, to have local government bills passed by consensus and acclamation, one would say, is a huge step forward. I think whatever happens, however as you said, voter education is important. There are persons out there who would want to stand up and contribute to public life by standing up as representatives.
One person has already said he wants to be mayor of Georgetown.
Okay, so there are great imponderables, but however we muddle through, or however the process unfolds before us, it must be an improvement over what we have now, and B, it will be just the first step, and maybe 3 years down the line we'll do better, and 3 years from that, so that it will be a space, an opening of the space in our common Guyanese
and it
culture.
creates leadership at the local level as well. At the moment, everything happens at the apex.
Yes, absolutely, and I think we need to learn how to do that again, because Guyana had, from all I've read, and AUC Guyana has written about this, model local government elections and not just model legislation, but model citizen and civic responsibility. And participation for about a century. And so while we've lost that over the last half century, I think there's enough consciousness and enough folk memory that we can rebuild that. And we're small enough, and I think we have still the possibilities of rebuilding that through the Guyanese institutions that have existed and stayed, like the churches and schools.
So you've got those positive signs. You travel around Georgetown, you travel the East Coast, West Coast, etc. Are you seeing developments in that regard?
No.
No?
I haven't traveled enough.
The houses, the roads, don't
Chris,
you see these things as positive developments?
When Barrington Brown, I think in the 1980s, wrote about development, and he described, he was thinking of colonialism, and he said it was magnificence built on squalor. And that's the kind of, that phrase, I remember that phrase when I looked at the facades of these glittering palaces and this immense kind of display of wealth along the coast. And I only went along the east coast up to Berbice, up to New Amsterdam, and then I was in the interior for a while. But I saw behind that the glitz and the glitter, which is such a tiny part of what of the social reality. I would see in Georgetown hundreds of people sleeping on the streets, and then this sheer human misery on full display along the East Bank and the East Coast and all the way up along the coast. So no, I saw more to despair over, because it was just glitz with nothing behind it.
So you don't think all the housing program in which the government has played its part, the private sector has played its part, and the people have responded, there are lots of new communities?
Yes, I think that's a great plus. So no, I was thinking of the big sort of buildings and the unaccounted for wealth. No, the housing program, Chris, I would think that's brought, it's significant, it's widespread, for most people, it was after the 80s when we had such a hunger for housing and land, and people were, it was unattainable. It is an achievement to be quite happy about. I think when I see the housing schemes, I'm always saddened that we didn't do better. I think in Guyana we should have had a little more land. We should have had more playgrounds in those housing schemes. We should have had less concrete and some more yard space for growing vegetables. I think, we with some more planning we might have done better.
Should have had community centres and playgrounds in all these communities.
And even in the square footage of the lot seems, even for the narrow coast, I thought we could have done better and given people, just build more resilience and more self-reliance with growing vegetables and being self-sufficient, which is simply not possible in the small lots I see.
You've been here. Now, when you're out of Guyana, we see the name Janette Bulkan a couple of times a week, perhaps. There is something that obviously drives you, a passion, a commitment, a dedication. When you thought of coming back and what I'm going to do, you get back and you're confronted with a reality. How does it affect you? What is it like?
I think that reality is what we make of it also. So, for example, I think the problems we see, which are overwhelming to Guyanese here and Guyanese abroad as well, because we see this setting aside of law, policies, procedures, and regulations across the sphere, across social life, whether it's forestry or mining or the allocation of radio licenses or fishing licenses. Whatever the sphere we're looking at, we see the same setting aside of what are really good laws and policies, procedures, and regulations. And so one can accept that and think this is the way Guyana is, where discretion rules and democratic centralism prevails, or one can do as I do. And I try to remind in my letters, we have good laws, we have policies, we have political manifestos. And so this is illegal. These are illegalities which are being presented as though they were acceptable. And I think that they're complicated issues, but when your letter, or my letter, stands and is not contradicted by anyone in government or anyone who is in charge, or it's only a ghostwriter who attacks me personally and not the message, then I know that the contents of my letter are true. And so they're a reminder of what we still can do and what we still can go back to, which is that we have good law. We have policies, we have procedures, we have regulations. And they're being set aside by those in power, but that doesn't make them right.
I travel occasionally, and sometimes you meet persons who, in fact, gave up on Guyana, left. And they say, well, why aren't you people doing more? They think it's easy. When you get here, do you find change easy to come by in Guyana?
No, change is not easy. I think I see that, well, it's only a superficial impression, but the young people or the younger generations are not as engaged in civic life or in political life or in social life in ways that one would hope for, so that they would take over from you, for example. And I think perhaps it's maybe as they grow older they will, perhaps, but the breakdown in the education system, I think, also means that they simply are not as prepared to think of an issue and break it down into its component parts and logically figure out what to do next.
So that's education in the broader sense?
In the broader sense. So that the generate A and B, the large, the great percentage of people who have migrated means that there is simply, we lack the kind of cohesiveness that might allow change to be self-generated from the bottom up. So I think and people are overwhelmed, those who want to affect change, because the problems are on all sides. I was speaking to someone who said the depressing thing about Amaila is that the government knows all it has to do is sit tight for 2 weeks, and everyone will have forgotten. It'll just be Christopher Ram who remembers and a few other people. But Guyanese will just go on to the next roadkill, the next catastrophe.
One area in which you probably are more qualified than many of us, or most of us, area of university education. You spend your life you're in academia. I don't know if you've gone back to University of Ghana, but where you taught. What's your view of our university?
Well, I went back very briefly, and of course, classes are in recess. It's 50 years after UG's in its 50th anniversary, yes. And it is just a political football. And so what I see, and it saddens me immensely, is that there's no will to see UG survive and even retain the, sort of hold on to the gains it hasn't up until now. And so it's very sad to see the university fallen in such straitened circumstances.
What do you think canon should be done? Because we've been grappling with that problem. I think everyone says the problem has become so acute now. How do you deal with that?
With UG?
Yeah.
Well, salaries aren't being paid. So, it's Chris, even at that level, we need to pay our lecturers and pay them better than they are now, because and pay all the support staff and raise the, I'm sure I have no immediate answers to give you, but it's the same at primary, secondary, and tertiary levels of education. We need to remove the crippling hand of the state and allow these institutions to function autonomously. But you start with a living wage. And so a living wage, I think, would make a difference to UG, and allowing the university to govern itself. Take primary education. It saddens me that our performance at examinations, both local and Caribbean-wide, are so poor.
That's overall, because we tend to couple top positions.
Yes, but the top people would do well anywhere in the world, but we set our children up for failure, and so that is a great loss, a great tragedy, and it goes back to we have to figure out how do we teach our children math and English. And surely that's not impossible, and a few other subjects. And if we prepare them well to take their place in modern life, it really would begin to be putting resources into teacher education and paying them well and creating the situation, the context for our children to perform and do well at examinations or in their adult lives. And we fail at that. Endless consultancies and endless make work plans, but all the while neglecting what's core, which is teachers who leave in droves whenever they can to go to the Caribbean, someplace else where they're treated with dignity, and the basics for education.
On Plain Talk this evening, we're speaking with, quite literally, visiting Professor Dr. Janette Bulkan. We're now taking our break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Plain Talk with Dr. Janette Bulkan, who is visiting Guyana from her work in the Department of Forest Resources Management at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, Canada. You have taken quite a prominent role in the discussions, the engagements on the Amaila Falls Hydro project. Why did that grab you, given that you're a forester? We know you and your dedication to forestry and forestry issues. What about the Amaila project?
I think what grabbed me was reading your columns and C.Y. Thomas's and even Seth Narayan Singh's recent letters in the press that remind us over and over again of what Amaila would mean in terms of its debt, the debt load that Guyanese will have to carry. And so to think about adding Amaila, 840 or 858 million US dollars, to all the other huge unaccountable projects which have not been consulted when those debts to the present debt load which taxpayers have to carry was frightening to me and remains frightening to me, because I think, have we considered enough as a people what are the implications of the way of Amaila as presently configured? And I think back to what we said just a bit earlier, that politicians are overwhelmed, and I think that's true for the government politicians as well as for the opposition in a country like Guyana, where we lurch from crisis to crisis. And I was thinking that in November 2012, as recently as November 2012, when the IMF came to Guyana and they issued their report, and normally they are very upbeat, and Guyana seems to be some kind of poster child for them, without them thinking through what the kinds of implications of what they say when they unreservedly praise Guyana. And they said about Amaila, we urge the government to consider whether you're getting value for money, to see whether this is cost effective. And we also urge that the governance of Amaila be transparent. And they singled out that project. And I thought, the World Bank has walked away. The IMF is now singling out this as a danger. And our politicians, right in the aftermath of that IMF report, also said to the government, we need to have this reviewed. And the government did as it always does, which is it sits tight for 2 weeks, ignores it, never responds. And then I came home and realized that on June 18th, that they were just, there was what occurred in Parliament when the opposition political parties refused to go along and rubber stamp this process, which would have led, of course, to the two bills being put on the website of the IDB, 120 days, and then perhaps ticking those boxes, and then landing the Guyanese taxpayer, with this immense debt for something that has not been consulted, or we have no idea of the parameters of it or what it entails. No documents are in the public domain, even though the IMF and the World Bank have urged caution. And so from a governance point of view, Amaila worries me. And I was trained as an anthropologist as well. And for me, June 18th is a significant date. And that resonated with me. June 18th, 1974 was the date at which at a toll booth on number 63 Village, on the Quarantine, when Arnold Rampersad was implicated in the shooting death. I don't know, none of us knows who shot the police constable to death there at that polling station, but it was widely accepted.
Tolling station, right?
The tolling station, the toll station. It was widely accepted that part of the resistance on Quarantine, up to that date and afterwards, was the resistance of people who had not been consulted over paying tolls for the improved road. June 18th, 2012, 3 Guyanese were assassinated on the Wismar Bridge. And so I came home on
Was
June
that June?
18th.
Was that June?
June 18th. July 18th, both
Yes,
dates, July
yes.
18th. And July 18th, I think on the anniversary of the Wismar shooting, we had this vote. And I think what links those 3 days, apart from the similarity of the date, was the lack of governance, the lack of consultation, not consulting the people of the quarantine, even for that small toll that sort of catalyzed that resistance and the death and its consequences when Walter Rodney led the defense of Arnold Rampersad. The Wismar Bridge, where the people of Linden said, you didn't consult us. They said that to the APNU, to the APNU political party, as well as to the government. You have not consulted us. I mean, you, Chris, have pointed out that Region 10 historically has contributed to a lot to the Guyanese economy. We seem to have such short memories of the contributions of various natural resources regions. So regions get left with the negative externalities while the coast
The
benefits.
bauxite dust and the
Absolutely.
big trucks and the bad
Yeah.
roads, etc. Yes.
So July 18th, 2012, the people of Linden said, the people of Wismar and Linden, you have not consulted us, and had a peaceful protest, which turned so horrible, so ugly. And July 18, 2013, I was struck again that maybe inadvertently so, opposition politicians said, time out. You have presented us with hundreds of, a number of pages, a lot of pages of new material. We cannot vote on this. And so Amaila for me is about the lack of governance and our failure to even take advantage of the possibilities we have. We can refer back to the World Bank's caution, the IMF's caution. These have been, institutions that have supported the present government, and say we need a process, we need an independent assessment, both of the technical issues, the financial issues, and the governance issues, as the IMF has said.
But isn't it also true that Guyanese have looked at Brazil, for example? They see 82% of Brazil's electricity needs are met out of hydro. We have, in terms of hydro potential density, given our small population, and the capacity for hydropower, that this is something that we should have. We hear the government talking about, we'll get rid of $200 million of payment, foreign exchange outflows because of not having to pay for fuel, that we will bring down rates. Are there positives to the hydropower project?
Absolutely. Guyana needs, I think all the commentators that I've read accept and want hydropower in Guyana, and think that this would make, among a suite of non-fossil fuel ways of generating energy, hydro is eminently suitable to Guyana with our many rivers and waterfalls. But it is the way Amaila is presently configured, with immense risks. This power that would come and be delivered to a GPL that is non-performing, or not performing very well, and is presently configured, having to receive that power and then have to pay those bills, just the bills that have to do with paying the 100 million US per year to the Amaila Falls, this special purpose vehicle.
It's 122 million.
122 million
several years.
For the first 12 years. And then we have to find all the money to, as our taxpayers have to do, to pay all the other costs of GPL, which I think I've read, or you may have said, or CYE, will have to keep at least 50% of its thermal electric generation capability for when Amaila is down for whatever reason, lack of water.
I think that's
or
Professor
something.
Thomas, yes.
Professor Thomas. So it isn't that I welcome hydro. I think there are possibilities to have small run-of-the-river projects. But whatever the vehicle we use, our politicians in Parliament should see a green paper. We should be able to figure out what are the line item costs, what are the implications of this, what are the risks for taxpayers, for present consumers of any hydro project, and especially Amaila, which is this big ticket item. So I am all for hydro. I'm not for a special purpose vehicle in which all the benefits seem to be, or many of the benefits are privatized, including the rates of return for scythe, and the costs are socialized.
You would have seen the government indeed held two consultations. You would have seen the social activists and citizens themselves holding consultations. How positive do you assess those developments?
Very positive. I think when I read Mr. Phip Motilal's the interview with him that Tablet News carried on Sunday, I think, I realized that Phip Motilal is a lawyer, and I realized that, like you are, that he knew much more about the processes and the procedures, why we had to have the parliament, why the government had to bring these two bills back to parliament, and the implications for being on the website of the IDB because of the Nancy Pelosi rule for 120 days. And I thought to myself, were it not for these external requirements, we would not have seen even this small opening. But the opening was there. There were the consultations, the stakeholder consultations, immense sort of response by many members of civil society at home and abroad too, saying, can we think about these risks? There are more questions than answers. Can we have an independent review about Amaila? And I think that's, even though it possibly only came because of this, the IDB requirements, is certainly better than not having had any of them at all.
There's a suggestion that, look, when IDB looks at this and decides whether or not it is going to invest 100 million or 175 million, it gives the stamp of approval. Are you that optimistic that because IDB says something is good from their perspective, it's necessarily good from the Guyanese consumer's perspective?
No, I'm not at all optimistic. In fact, I would reject, as you have and as Professor Thomas has done, the idea that the IDB should be the institution that helps us to determine whether we make a decision, whether it's in net social benefit or net national benefit. I was absolutely, I was outraged that Scythe would write a letter condemning Guyanese for our response to this company that would come. And I thought, why was that company even invited into the National Assembly? You know, would they have allowed, would in any other self-respecting country have allowed a few private guys to come and insult the government of Guyana or the people of Guyana? So I am not, that's why I've asked in my letters, I think we need independent assessments. We need a green paper from government, first of all. We can ask our, if we had a functioning civil society, we can invite independent, impartial expertise, both local and international, World Commission on Dams, the International Rivers Commission, to come and help us to think through what are the positives, what are the risks, what are the consequences, and on which we can make informed decisions. Because in the end, it is the taxpayer who pays this.
One of the things we hear is that, look, we have had this application from Phip Motilal since 1997. That's 16 years ago. Now that this project is closer to reality, malcontents and probably anarchists want to derail all of these possibilities. How do you respond to that?
Well, I was at the second stakeholder consultation, as you were, Chris, and Brian Kupek, I think that's his name, said they were in Guyana, Scythe, for 6 years and had spent 16 million. He also said that they began meeting with the opposition parties in Parliament from January 2012. So I think up until that point, they had been completely impervious or considered it completely unnecessary to engage the Guyanese public or the long-suffering Guyanese taxpayer or the Guyanese opposition politicians in any of the decision-making processes to lead to Amaila. So if FIP had his contract for 16 years, he was dealing only with the very top. Those licenses were being rolled over. I think you've pointed out the law says they should have been not renewed, but they should have gone back and been re-advertised. So they were.
Well, it says the president after his retirement may just suspend them because clearly nothing was happening.
But back to a plantation, it wasn't as though governance exists or people had a right to know. They were just simply, you have no right to know what's going on. We are dealing with this at the top, and we will inform you, whether it's Berbice Bridge or the Marriott or the Skeldon Sugar Factory. These large investments are undertaken with very little consultation with the people who have to finally pay for them. And I think the same is true of Amaila, that the 16 millions were maybe spent and the 6 years of investment without any heed or thought that the people of Guyana should have been involved in any sense in knowing what were the implications of this large investment.
You live and operate in the North America. Could you imagine a project with this kind of implication, whether for Vancouver or for Canada or for North America, taking place without serious, active involvement and consultation with the affected, with everyone?
Well, I think they've had a longer history of disclosures, of active civil society, of procedures for challenges. So politicians, I think, everywhere would try to get away with aggrandizing and maximizing their power, of course, or big business, or the crony capitalists. But in places like North America, there would be enough safeguards that people would be more aware of the safeguards and protections in law and use them. And there would be more people to share the work, as opposed to a few tired, overwhelmed civil society persons like yourself who have to, respond
quite a few others.
Respond to these dictatorial, these kind of dictatorial decisions.
Well, couple of nights ago, further step was taken with a motion being passed in the National Assembly for guaranteeing, and in fact a bill that is very Amaila related. How do you see the next few months playing out over Amaila? And what do you see the future of this project?
I don't know enough. I know from what Mr. Motilal said, as reported in Stabrook News, the way is now clear for those two bills to be, or some version of it to be on the IDB website. I imagine that the government, the plan is, who knows, because we haven't been told, that after 120 days, IDB makes a decision. If they do, then everything else, because we were told at the stakeholders' consultation that the prices being, the estimates of China, is it Development Bank or Exim? The Exim Bank,
China Development
and China Railway, First Railway, their estimates will hold only until December 31. And hence, I think this urgency to have had the bill. I hope that the politicians have a plan B, our opposition politicians, and just don't think of it that nothing can be done. I think certainly, based on the advice and the caution urged by the IMF less than a year ago, urged by the World Bank, which moved away, that our politicians can now request Norwegian support, for example, and say we would like to have some of the money in the GRIF be used to fund independent technical and financial and governance assessments of this large project.
Do you see one of the consequences of that, and SITE has actually perhaps suggested it, that look, if there's any more, if you people are going to delay this thing, we're out. Are you bothered about SITE pulling out?
I think it would be a good day, a great day for Guyana if SITE were to pull out. I think I see this from all this hope expressed not just by you, but by all the other serious commentators who put Guyana first, aside from political party proclivities.
We wait and see as far as that goes. Forestry, which is quite close to your heart as well. How do you see, what's this? We haven't been hearing much. Is it that everything is going nice and smoothly? We've got Barama was once an issue. Now Bai Shenlin and other Chinese enterprise has come in and is practically gobbling up forest resources in Ghana. Are we now making full and better use of our forests?
Well, what's happened, I think, beginning in 2007, is that whatever information one could get on forestry has now been practically shut down. So think North Korea in the tropics. This is as true of forestry, the forestry sector, as it is of most others. Whatever little information comes out of forestry is aggregated and given out in very restricted, to very restricted audiences. But what little is given out, we can tell that there's been retrogression in the forestry sector rather than progress.
Of course, there's the Right to Information Act that has now been brought into force, and one can statutorily request information and hopefully be given it in promptly.
I haven't seen any. I know the former Attorney General was
He's been appointed Commissioner of
yes.
Information.
But I haven't seen any. I don't think anyone I haven't seen any sort of appeals to that or requests submitted.
Or any public education work on his
Right.
part to say, look,
Yeah.
I'm here, I'm ready to. I'm the person who should facilitate
Yeah.
the issue of information to you.
Yeah. So 1991, the first large, was a year of the first large concession to an Asian logger, that was Barama, which was given a concession to 1.6 million hectares.
You had a lot of problems with that
Guyana.
one, did you?
Absolutely. Well, Guyanese were outraged. You know, what the people, when you looked at the columns then, what the people see, there was a sense that this was national patrimony that was simply by the Hoyt administration that had been unthinkingly.
But then we just accepted it. Barama is now one of the accepted members of corporate society.
And we replicated the Barama as with the Indian company Coffee Day, VHPI, Bai Shenlin. These are three mega companies that straddle the large-scale concessions. But to ask you, what about forestry? So we know around the time of Barama in 1991, the contribution of the forestry sector to GDP was between 3.4, 3.5%. We have not improved on that between 1991 and 2013. The contribution of the forestry sector remains the same, even though we have given these immense concessions to foreigners with implications.
Both physical concessions and fiscal concessions.
Precisely, with implications for sovereignty and with implications for national life, because we've foreclosed other options. So the state forest of Guyana, just to sort of give a sense to your audience of how frightening this is, our state forests are about 12 million hectares in extent. That's the area that's controlled by them, that's managed by the state. Half of that area is under concession, so about 6 million hectares.
To whom? To how many places?
Well, they're large-scale, long-term concessions, and then they are the ones which are for up to 2 years duration, which would be the ones that are considered short-term and small-scale. But the large-scale concessions, which can only be issued under the authority of the president, again, information is only issued in aggregate form. But we know that of the 6 million hectares which are under concession, 80% or 4/5 are under these large-scale, long-term concessions, over 80%. And so this is like private property, because these are never rescinded. They traded among traded among concessionaires, or when when the state takes them back, as they did with the one that was given to Coffee Day, they're handed out without going into a public auction.
That's the one that was taken away.
CRL.
It was with Clico.
With Clico.
Clico subsidiary CRL.
Yes. So we have a context in Guyana where about 6 million hectares are under concession. 4/5 of that,
so that's 50%.
6 million hectares of
six of 12.
Of 12.
Yes.
Of that 6 million odd hectares of forest, 80% is under this large-scale long-term concessions. So they are they've been like privatized, and of that 80%, by my calculations, over 60% are held by a few Asian loggers, Chinese and Indian. So this has implications for sovereignty that we know nothing about. And this is a great tragedy for me. It's an abomination that we have so easily treat our national patrimony so lightly, while it brings no returns in jobs or upskilling or downstream processing, all the things which are enshrined in our National Forest Policy of 1997, National Forest Plan of 1997, the NDS, the National Development Strategy of 1996-2001, the Manifesto of the People's Progressive Party, the party in power. We have good law, we have regulations, we have manifestos, and yet we've set them aside and we've allowed the majority of our best forests to be controlled in a private way by a few Asian companies.
You probably are aware, I was in London recently attending a conference in which Guyana was featured, and we hear Guyana is getting into a voluntary partnership agreement with the EU. How will that help our forestry sector in terms of governance and better economic and social returns to our people?
Well, I think my understanding is the reason Guyana has embarked on the VPA, the Voluntary Partnership Agreement, is because it's one of the requirements under the Norwegian-Guyana MOU of November 2009. Because our trade with Europe is very small. I think, I don't have the figure in my head, Chris, because I didn't know this, but it's a tiny trade to Europe. And so the Voluntary Partnership Agreement,
by now.
The Voluntary Partnership Agreement is only concerned with the exports to Europe. And we know, you and I know, that even those exports, tiny as they are a vehicle for cocaine in digger mats and cocaine in hollowed out logs that have been going to Europe. So that is maybe that's the trade to Europe is part of the whole breakdown of governance in this country, where I guess drug lords, we never hear their names, but they are protected. So the Norwegians required the VPA to be part of one of the requirements for the MOU. Yes. It's possible that it could have opening of governance, improvement of governance for Guyana, for the forestry sector, but only insofar as that process comes under independent scrutiny and independent Guyanese involvement. At the moment, it is concentrated and run out of the Guyana Forestry Commission. So there is no independent participation of civil society members or other stakeholders except by invitation of the Forestry Commission. The same situation as in the Norway-Guyana MOU, where this so-called multi-stakeholder steering committee is by invitation of the president. So it is a travesty of what independent stakeholder, an independently chaired body should be and could be.
When I was at a conference, I was a bit taken aback by a presentation by one of the deputy at the Forestry Commission, and he was very proudly was telling the audience about the control that Forestry Commission has over our forestry, from the cutting right to the point of export. I had to participate in the discussion, and I asked, well, how did we get how did $8 million of cocaine get into logs? What happens? How does something like this happen?
I think
What made it possible?
I think it's a concentration of power. Very few people are allowed to know what goes on in forestry. And so it's possible if in a situation where who gets monitored or who is being checked, whose areas are checked on the ground, are politically directed. And so if you are in good favor, your shipments will go through. So in Guyana, we have, for example, a context where we never know who's exporting what. But if, from what I know, is that you'll have people who hold agricultural leases on the Berbice River are exporting thousands of, their names are used to export thousands of dollars worth of Wamara wood to China and India. Amerindian villages are exporting thousands. Their names are on the documents. But these are a front for Chinese traders. So we can't have, because of the way, whoever's name is on that, where that wood is being taken from, or on the paperwork, those are the exporters. So we have layers of illegality that are you never see, because those documents are never allowed to, no one is allowed to see them.
How serious? We know China is a great economy, a great civilization, but we know, and you read the books on China and they tell you, look, China's resurgence was largely because of breaking all the rules. How do you rate the influence, corruptive influence, positive influence of China in terms of trafficking in persons, in terms of money laundering, breaking rules?
It's quite frightening, because I think the Chinese have, they're looking out for national interests. They want natural resources. They want jobs for their nationals. They want to sell their manufactures. And for them, it seems that, they know that they can they can so arrange things in Guyana that national law, regulations, policies, and procedures simply do not apply to them. And they are protected at the very highest levels of the state machinery. So I think at one level, China, with its ancient and proud civilization, must hold us in immense contempt, that we are so without dignity that we can be bought for so little, give away our natural resources from bauxite and all the bauxite mines and concessions, to in mining, in gold and diamond mining as well, forestry, laying down of infrastructure, building of hotels, a failed Skeldon plant, and I can go on. And with no due diligence, no penalty clauses, no jobs for Guyanese, I think the Chinese must hold us in contempt, and deservedly so, because we have simply allowed ourselves to be walked over.
Why do you think the government, and those decisions seem to be made by a handful of persons, why do you think the government, or those persons in the government, allow this situation to take place?
I wonder about that, Chris, because I see, for example, that the Chinese, Guyana is not the only place where Chinese investment and Chinese personnel have moved. They're all over Africa, but in country after country in Africa, the local politicians have said enough and have forced the Chinese to obey their rules. Ghana recently did it and is doing it. Other African countries are saying to the Chinese, you will operate here under the same laws as govern every other company. And the Chinese are agreeing to those rules. But I've seen no evidence that the same is happening here, and I have no idea why. And I wonder, have we no sense of sovereignty or self-respect, that we would not want to have some clauses that would protect Guyanese laws, regulations, policies, with respect to foreign direct investment.
Just briefly, how optimistic are you that our governance in the forestry sector, just brief answer, will improve in the short term?
It could if the opposition political parties made use of the laws which are already in existence. So by the GFC Act of 2007, the Guyana Forestry Commission is required by law annually to lay annual reports and audited financial reports to the Parliament. The parties simply have to ask, can we see your annual reports and your annual audited reports for last year and the year before? And we can begin to make a difference and get the Guyana Forestry Commission to obey its own laws or our forestry law. There's been, as far as I'm aware, no commencement order yet for the revised Forest Act of 2009. So claiming that that is the law is again, ultra vires. So I think I'm optimistic if our opposition political parties can simply take advantage of what openings there are at the moment.
Dr. Janette Bulkan, I want to thank you very much for appearing on Plain Talk. I understand by the time this program is broadcast, you will have left. I wish you Godspeed in your journey, and we look forward to having you back. We look forward to your letters and your comments in the local newspapers.
Thank you.
Operators and viewers, thank you. Good night. See you next week.